do this too. Hello, Susan. Hello, Karen.
Oh,
Hello.
How are you both?
Good. Well,
Good. I'm loving that, when we first started doing this a couple years ago, there was always this like sweat factor that we had on if Facebook was going to talk to Zoom and all of this. And it's like, it's so wonderful now. It's just like instantaneous. So it's very, very good for, at least for us who you're looking at the tech department here at Warwick. So I'm very happy that this works. So welcome to both of you. Karen, Under a Veiled Moon just released yesterday.
yes, it did.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I just heard when we were talking in the green room that we're actually the first event. So we're feeling very excited about that.
You are.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Susan, in your bio, I'm going to talk about this when I do your bio, but I saw there was just somebody, a little person by the name of Kate Quinn that happened to be like reading and recommending your book this week.
yeah, not bad, right?
Not a bad rec.
Not a bad recommendation.
Not a bad little tweet there going on. So I did see that too. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for those of you that are joining us on Facebook right now, I'm going to be talking to you in the comment section. I will be putting in how to order Karen's book and Susan's book. You can easily order them from us. We're located in San Diego, La Jolla, California. We ship books. We're one of the, I think that's what everybody found out during the pandemic. We were doing this and it's like independent bookstores ship books. So is that a kitty I'm hearing?
I know, it's okay. And
I love Susan's cat.
I get to the vet today and she's still complaining. She got this morning. It's now evening and she's
still not happy with you. She's like, why aren't you on the couch?
I apologize, Karen. I apologize.
No worries.
Oh, here comes my husband to take Lola into the bedroom.
There you go.
Because I can't wait to talk about Karen's new book, Under a Veiled Moon.
I know, I can't either. So I'm going to put in how to order those books on the comment section. They're going to chat if you're watching this on YouTube later, sorry that we're not live with you, but it's going to be a great conversation. So stick with us. But Susan and Karen are going to talk for about 35 minutes after I get off this screen here. I'll pop back in after that with questions. So if you have any questions for either Karen or Susan, please put those in the comment section. We always love your questions too. I know it's going to be a great conversation, but the audience questions are fun. It feels like you're actually here in the room with us. So with that, let me introduce these two lovely authors and then I will go away. Karen, now you said, now I'm going to mispronounce your name, Odden.
Yeah, just think about the Norse god who ripped an eyeball out of his head in exchange for power.
Okay.
When you see me, think of that.
Okay. I'm gonna just say Karen. Odden.
Odden.
Karen earned her PhD in English from New York University and subsequently taught literature at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She has contributed essays to numerous books and journals, written introductions for Victorian novels in the Barnes & Noble Classic series, and edited for the journal Victorian Literature and Culture, Cambridge UP. That's a University Press, right? Cambridge University Press. Yep. Her previous novels, also set in 1870s London, have won awards for historical fiction and mystery. A member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime, and the recipient of a grant from the Arizona Commission on the Arts. She lives in Arizona with her family and her rescue beagle, Rosie. I've got Rosie. Is Rosie with us tonight too? We're going to see Rosie.
Actually, Rosie passed away.
Oh,
I know this is sorry. You had no way of knowing that bio is a little bit outdated.
Oh.
Yeah, but she was 18 and she had an amazing life. And so
you were a very good parent to her.
And we were really lucky. She hung in there for a really long time. She's a great dog.
We just lost last year we lost our 13-year-old pug. So it's so hard. When they stay around for a long time, it's hard. So sorry about that. Okay.
That's okay. Thank you.
But we're here to celebrate and to talk about her new book, like Susan mentioned earlier, Under a Veiled Moon. Joining her, as you see on screen, is Susan. Oh my goodness, Elia.
Yes, very good.
Elia MacNeal. Susan is the New York Times bestselling author of the Maggie Hope.
Yeah.
Every time I see Maggie, I think Magpie. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
Maggie Hope Mysteries. She won the Barry Award and has been nominated for the Edgar, McCavity, Agatha, Left Coast Crime, Dillies, and ITW Thriller Awards. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her husband and son. And her new book, Mother, Daughter, Traitor, Spy, is her first standalone novel. And we were talking in the green room a little bit about, or did I just talk about it just now? I can't remember if we were live or not. That I spied Kate Quinn reading that. So that's
right. Yeah.
That was
Kate
kind
also
of
was nice enough to give a blurb. So
Kate. Fantastic. So a couple of great books to be ordering in that comment section. You ladies have a great conversation, and I'll see you in a little bit.
All right.
Thank you, Julie. Hey, Karen.
Hey, Susan. I'm so glad you did this.
Oh, I am so happy to be doing this. I can't even tell you. I just wish it were live and we were like sitting on stools next to each other, but next time.
Yes.
So I'm a huge fan of the first book, Down a Dark River. And I fell in love with your protagonist. And Michael is Coravan, right? I say that right? Okay.
Yep, you did.
Sometimes when you read, you don't get it right. Okay, so Michael Coravan is back in the sequel, but you don't have to read the first one, right? You can just pick the new one, which I have it right. I am in love with Michael because he's kind of amazing and charismatic. And also hats off to you. Okay, you've got a protagonist who's male, who's Irish, who's living in London, who is what, 30 something, like 32?
31.
Like all these things that you and
I am not
female here in 2022 are not. So can you tell me a little bit about how you came up with Michael? And then the second part of the question, like how you decided to continue on into the sequel, Under a Veiled Moon?
Okay, this is a great question. So my first 3 books all feature different young women heroines who become amateur sleuths in 1870s London. And for each book, I took some aspect of Victorian culture and had them try to figure out the puzzle within it. So the first one was a railway disaster that was a sabotage. That was Lady Elizabeth. And then the next one was Nell Hallam in the world of music halls and corrupt thieving gangs. And then the third one was the sort of the underbelly of the art and auction world that Annabelle had to navigate.
Oh yeah, that was fun too.
So each time I had sort of a world that I wanted to plunk one of my heroines into and have her figure out this mystery involving someone that she knew who was either murdered or injured or something. But for Down a Dark River, I didn't begin with an aspect of Victorian culture. I actually began with a story that I read about a contemporary account actually of injustice in the United States present day. And it was about a young woman and she had been jaywalking across the street in Alabama, and a car came flying around the corner and hit her, and the driver was drunk and she was put in the hospital for months with her injuries. And when they sued on her behalf, when her family sued on her behalf, the judge very callously and dismissively gave her $2,000 because she'd been jaywalking. Now, there's all kinds of things wrong with this story, but what struck me also was that in the aftermath, her father threatened the judge's daughter.
Oh.
And that really captured me, because I thought, this isn't what I think of as simple eye for an eye revenge. This is really, to some extent, about the judge's failure of empathy and the father's revenge being really a last-ditch howl for justice and fairness and compassion that he didn't get in the law court. He wanted the judge to understand what it is to almost lose a child. So I decided I really wanted to write about failures of empathy and how that can lead to revenge and all that kind of nice, messy stuff, and put it in Victorian London. But I was not like 3 pages into writing this before I realized I could not have my young amateur woman sleuth doing this. I needed a judge, I needed lawyers, I needed corrupt witnesses, I needed, I needed a policeman. And so that was where Michael Coravan kind of came into being. And I In Dangerous Duet and Trace of Deceit, my second and third books, I had inspectors of Scotland Yard, an inspector of Scotland Yard. His name was Matthew Hallam. He was Nell Hallam's brother, and he is the love interest in Trace of Deceit. So I had done a lot of research about inspectors, and I have a really wonderful book. I think I have it here. This one, it's very heavy and big, but it's called The Ascent of the Detective in Victorian London. And it is my sort of my go-to. I read it a couple of times, and I was kind of gathering pieces of Michael Corrivan as I went. And he just sort of gelled for Down a Dark River. And then, of course, I carried him into the next book.
What made you decide to go into the sequel? What made you decide we needed more Michael, which of course we do because he is so charismatic.
He's charismatic and he's cool and he's rough around the edges, but he's got a great heart. He's also really good looking. And well, part of it was honestly, this is just practical. I mean, Crooked Lane, my publisher wanted a second book. So I had a 2-book deal. And so I knew that I had to come up with a second one.
And then how did you, because the plot, and I'm not going to give spoilers, but the plot has to do with a shipwreck in the Thames. And it's real. It's a real event. It really happened. And the fallout is real. And we all go on that journey with Michael. So how did you know about this? Were you just like researching and you found out? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you and I have talked about how our research like drops the goodies into our lap here and there, and you find things. So about halfway through researching Down a Dark River, I was doing all of this research about the Thames. And to me, the Thames is one of the most suggestive environments for a book because a lot of people don't know this, but it's tidal.
Yeah.
So twice a day, the water falls and rises and falls and rises, sometimes in some places up to 24 feet. And so you get trash and detritus and you get treasures that are all kind of thrown up on the banks of the river. So you've got mudlarkers kind of coming in and sweeping through and doing that. So it's a really changeful environment, but at the same time, it's steady. And I think that that's just a really kind of productive environment for this. So I'm reading all about the Thames. I've got these really cool books about the river and the history of the river. And I come across this line that said, the worst maritime disaster on the Thames ever, 1878. And then the author kind of went on to a whole bunch of other stuff. And I thought, okay, wait, what was that? You know, sort of like a little like crochet hook, like nagging at me. So of course I had to Google it. And the Princess Alice disaster was, and what was strange about it was it happens 3 months after Down a Dark River finishes. So the timing kind of I mean, it was kind of perfect. Yeah. And so the disaster was interesting to me because I didn't realize that there were steamships on the Thames, but there were this small fleet of them. There was a Princess Alice and a Duke something. I mean, they're named for princesses and dukes. And there were several of them, kind of like our hop on, hop off buses that you could hop on in the morning for 2 shillings right there by London Bridge on Swan Pier, and then take the boat all the way out to the North Sea and then turn around and come back all in one day. But you could hop off and have a picnic and hop back on the next one and, you know, this sort of thing. But that night at 8:30 at night on September 3rd, it was Princess Alice was coming up the South Shore up and around Tripcock Point, which is a blind curve, and it was rammed by the Bywell Castle, which is a 900-ton coal ship, like a steel-hulled, you know, monster. This is kind of like a railway train running into a baby carriage. I mean, it was just, so the wooden steamship broke into 3 pieces, sank within 4 minutes, and threw 650 people into the river. But because it was a hop on, hop off, nobody knows who's on the boat.
Oh, wow.
There's no passenger manifest. And so I felt like this opened up all kinds of intriguing possibilities. And in fact, there was this one story that I thought was really cool, which I did not work into my book, but about this man who had wanted to escape his life. Basically, he didn't love his wife anymore and he wanted to escape his wife. So he pretended to drown and reinvented his identity and like ran off to France or something. I mean, that was a true story. So
wow, you could do but like things before the internet.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Nobody can track you down. So, but I just had all kinds of possibilities. And then of course I also, you know, the writer in me thought, well, you know, true history says it was an accident. The Princess Alice was someplace she wasn't supposed to be. The Bible Castle was going too fast. But what if it wasn't an accident? You know, it's the author question though. What if? And so then I started thinking about what if it was on purpose?
And did you ever find anything out definitively? Was it was it on purpose?
I really think it was definitely an accident. It was part of the problem was that nautical laws were written but not necessarily adhered to,
Right.
because there were customs that went against nautical law. For example, nautical law says 2 ships passing have to pass port to port. So they have to pass like this. They're not allowed to pass this way. But the problem is that the little ships tend to like to hug the shore because when there's an ebb tide, it's less forceful there. So they don't have to burn so much coal going upstream, for example. And also the Bywell Castle, which is huge, needs a deeper area of the river to navigate.
Right.
So it's custom for them to pass starboard to starboard instead of port to port, but that was part of the problem. And there were a couple, I think there were like 2 or 3 different agencies that had their hands in the nautical laws. So what ends up happening at the end of the whole trial and everything else in the inquest is that they kind of codify law and give it to one agency and make it a little bit more established, I think.
Yeah. One thing I love about this book is that it's told in first person. And I was wondering what made you decide to do that. I personally find that so hard. So I give a huge hat tip to you for doing first person like mystery, because it's a hard way to get all your information out. So can you tell us about that?
You know, my first 3 were all written first person. And I think I wanted to give Michael the opportunity to grow personally. I mean, in your books, you do that with Maggie. She's always got that kind of character arc where she's growing.
Yeah.
And in your next one, I've just started it. Your
Mother,
new
Daughter,
book
Traitor,
with
Spy.
Mother, Daughter, Traitor, Spy, and you can see where Veronica's got a lot of growing up to do, and you know you can kind of see it coming. But I think I wanted to have Michael and the reader be very close together in what they knew. So I wouldn't have like a third person or an omniscient narrator dropping clues in for the reader that Michael doesn't have access to. I wanted them to be very close, partly because I feel like Michael's plot line is to some extent about intimacy and vulnerability and what it means to get close to somebody.
That is fascinating. Yeah. And I feel like there is an intimacy that you get with Michael as you keep reading, because you learn so much more. We actually learned so much more in this book about his family life and how he grew up. And he's Irish. And then he was adopted by an Irish family in London. So he's living in the Whitechapel area, or he was brought up in the Whitechapel area. That's where Jack the Ripper, of course, did his deeds.
Yes.
Talk about writing an Irish character in London in Victorian times.
Yeah, this was another one of those little nuggets that dropped in on me. I think when I was researching for Trace of Deceit, because I came across a lot of, I don't know, just a lot of kind of like light references to the anti-Irish feeling at the time. And it got me to start reading up on the Potato Famine that was 1845 to 1849. And I mean, millions of Irish died. Or were transplanted or had to leave for Canada, or, you know, and they were going on these ships. They were packed in and they were called coffin ships leaving from Liverpool. I mean, the story is kind of hard reading. But I didn't realize how systemic and vitriolic the anti-Irish prejudice was until I started digging around. And at the beginning, Michael Corrigan wasn't Michael Corrigan. He was Michael Wren. And he wasn't Irish when I first started writing Down a Dark River.
Fascinating.
And yeah. And it's funny because I have a friend, Roger, who was an early beta reader. And he said, this guy isn't a wren. Wren is like a little bird. Like, you know, it's like, no, you need a raven, you need something big. And then I started doing all of this research and found out that Corabin actually derives from O Corabin, which is it's Gaelic. And I thought, okay, what if I made him, he's already an outsider by virtue of being a Scotland Yard detective.
Mhm.
Because I know, like, a lot of people think of Scotland Yard detectives as sort of the elite branch, but in the 1870s, especially in 1878, they were almost shut down because in 1877, there had been a trial of 4 senior Scotland Yard inspectors. They'd been convicted of taking bribes from con men.
Okay.
And they were sentenced to jail and to hard labor. And this trial was held at the Old Bailey. And I know you've been to London. This Old Bailey is this
been to the Old
huge,
Bailey, yes.
you've been to it. So it's this enormous courthouse. And it's kind of like it's like Judge Judy on steroids. And they had mobs of people surrounding the courthouse. They had them up in the balcony looking down. There were newspapers. All of the newspapers of London were reporting on this scandalous thing. I mean, I think the trial went on for 3 weeks with testimony from all these various people about how terrible Scotland Yard is. So as of November 1877, they were like persona non grata. Nobody wanted to talk to the Yard. And Parliament actually had they set up a special inquiry, and they decided they were going to shut the Yard down, or at least cut it way, way, way back, like down to like 6 plainclothes inspectors instead of the 35, I think, that they had at the time. And there was a guy named Howard Vincent. He is the second son of a baronet, and spoke 5 languages. He was a newspaper reporter for the Daily Mail. He had gone to France and done a whole bunch of research about the French police system. He brought it back to Parliament and said, I think I can clean up this mess for you. Here is my document. And I mean, Parliament read his report and said, okay, if you think you can fix this, go to it, be the new broom that sweeps this clean. And he went in there and he was very ethical. He wrote a police procedural, he reinforced the rules, he upped the salary so people weren't so likely to take bribes. He really cleaned it up. And he is a character in my book. And I really like Mr. Vincent. But anyway, but at the time, I mean, all of the Scotland Yard people were really sort of considered on the outside of the Metropolitan Police Force.
So Michael's like a double outsider.
He's like a double outsider, yeah, between being a Scotland Yard guy and Irish. I mean, he's kind of swimming upstream twice.
He transfers jobs though in between books, correct? Why does he do that? Can you tell us?
So, well, in Down a Dark River, one of the things, he's actually an inspector at Scotland Yard working with Mr. Vincent.
Right.
And one of the things that kind of comes out during the course of an investigation is that the superintendent at Wapping River Police, which is about, I don't know, maybe a few miles east of Scotland Yard, and it's right there on the river. It's still there. You can go. I actually went and saw the docks and everything last time I was in London. The superintendent was found guilty of covering up a murder by 2 of his guys. He had wanted some evidence. The 2 river policemen went and got the evidence by beating someone to death. And the superintendent covers it up. So when that comes out, Vincent's like, yeah, no, that's not happening on my watch. So he kicks him out and he installs Michael Corabin as the acting superintendent. Now, by the end of the book, it's clear that the time is not right to have an Irishman who is going to be the head of Wapping. So he's going to come back to the Yard for book 3.
Excellent. Good to know. Also good to know there's a book 3 because
well, here's hoping.
Yeah. What is the craziest thing that you discovered while doing research for this book?
It's a great question because I was kind of continually surprised by things, but I guess the thing that really shocked me was the level of anti-Irish discourse that was published in places like the London Times. Benjamin Disraeli, under a pseudonym, but Benjamin Disraeli wrote a letter to the Times that uses language that we would not get printed in any paper now about the Irish and their race.
Right.
And I was shocked. And then I was actually digging through, because then when I started like looking into all this, I thought, okay, I want to get my facts straight here. And so I actually dug up this copy of The Races of Men, which I read in grad school back at NYU. It's an 1850 treatise by a guy named Robert Knox, MD. And he says, I'll read this from the front page: human character, individual and national, is traceable solely to the nature of that race to which the individual or nation belongs. It's a statement which I know must meet with the severest opposition, but it is simply a fact.
Wow.
And the three races he talks about are the Gaelic race, which is corrupt and unable to discern truth. And then we have let's see, which is the next race, the Belgians, and the Saxons. So there you have it.
Hey, wow.
Yeah. And and it was just one example, but I started finding it everywhere. Once you started looking, it's a really ugly thread through a lot of the literature.
Absolutely. Even through World War II.
Mm-hmm.
The IRA was anyway. So did you get to go to London to do your research for this? It kind of sounds like you did.
I did. Yes.
Oh, I love that.
So when I was in grad school, I went over, I was researching Victorian railway disasters for my dissertation, because I was interested in the way that like the medical and legal treatises of the 1860s and 70s and the novels and the newspapers and all the cartoons and all the ephemera were all borrowing tropes and stuff from each other to try to talk about these bizarre injuries like nightmares and tremors and strange patterns in blood pressure and all of these things that happened after railway accidents. And they didn't know what to call it. I mean, we would call it PTSD. The doctors in World War I would call it shell shock. Freud would call it hysteria, but they didn't know what to call it. And they called it railway spine. And I was interested in how these 1860s and 70s texts, fumbling as they were, created sort of a foundation for Freud in the 1890s to talk about hysteria. And then, of course, it kind of built from there. Anyway, so I did 6 weeks worth of research in London and at the British Library on Euston Road, which is so much fun. And I got to live there and walk and everything else. And then I ended up going back, I don't know, maybe 10 years later when I was researching for Dangerous Duet, because I was interested in the Royal Academy of Music, which is where Fanny Dickens studied. She was Charles Dickens' older sister, and she was a genius. Like, she studied with one of Beethoven's prodigies. But she ended up having to give it up in 1826 or so, I think somewhere in there, because she didn't have the money to stay at the Royal Academy. And that kind of gave me my idea for Nell Hallam, because in the 1870s, she could earn her money because there were music halls and every music hall needed a pianist.
Absolutely.
So she could do that. And then while I was at the Royal Academy, they happened to have a whole exhibit on music halls. And the woman who was kind of the librarian there, I got talking to her about it and Fanny Dickens and the music halls, and she says, there is one music hall left in London from the Victorian period. It's called Wilton's. It's in Grace's Lane, and you can go see it. And so I went and I did that. And I think that like standing in the back of the room and looking at this beautiful room, and I could imagine Nell in her piano alcove. I could see the stage, I could see everything. And that taught me the value of actually getting your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Walking the city and seeing the stuff. And then my daughter was actually at Oxford last fall. And so I met her in December and we were there for a couple of weeks together, and I did some more. And then, I think you've probably seen it too. The great thing about London is so much of their story is literally written on their walls. They have plaques everywhere where you can read about people who lived there or people who died there or whatever the bridge was for, or whenever it was originally built and then replaced because of World War II bombing or whatever it was. So it's nice.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's I found a lot of contemporary resonance in Michael's story and in this novel. And I was just wondering if you saw similarities between that time in London and today, and did you do that on purpose, or did you try to separate that? Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You're so sensitive. You're such a good sensitive reader.
I love the book. I really loved the book.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm 5 books along now. And so I kind of have come around to recognizing that part of the reason I write historical fiction is because when the world of the book and the world of the reader are different enough, I think it creates a space where you can do some creative what if thinking about certain issues. And in Victorian London, okay, they didn't have Twitter and Facebook, but they had 1,000 newspapers.
Right.
They had handbills. They had social media. It just didn't look like our social media.
Right.
And these newspapers they leaned left, they leaned right, they were anti-communist, they were all, or anti-socialist or whatever. I mean, they had all of they leaned in their particular directions, and they weren't particularly well regulated. So people could print things that weren't quite true and then retract them the next day, and that kind of thing could happen. And so I think the social media aspect of this book, with all of the newspapers really participating in not just reflecting the news but producing it, I think that that's really relevant for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way that a story can begin to take on a certain kind of life and energy with enough repetition. And and we got to be a little careful about that. And so I don't want to write a book with a message, like,
of course not,
something overt. Yeah, but at the same time, I felt like this is something I want to talk about. This is something I see going on in our world today, and it was going on in the Victorian era too. So it's not like it was a stretch.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about this book is the gorgeous poetry allusions that you have. And under a veiled moon is a Shelley quote, of course. And then I've at least recognized some Tennyson. And there's probably more that I didn't even catch. But can you talk about poetry and how you've used it in this book?
Well, it's a little tricky because Corvin is not educated. He's not book educated. I mean, he knows how to, obviously he knows how to read and write, and he's quick with his sums because he used to do bookkeeping basically for Ma Doyle in her shop in Whitechapel. But he's not the type who's going to sit down and read poetry or literature. Right. But Belinda, his love interest, is. She's a novelist. She's kind of a composite of about 4 different Victorian women writers that I had read about, and some of them I'd worked on for my dissertation. And so she's a bit of an outlier, but she's not that much of an outlier, because there are quite a few women who are making a living by their pen. And poetry is sort of Belinda's language, but I like to have her sort of help Corvin see that. And he's sensitive. He's not clueless. And he does recognize the value of language and words. And I do, and I'm a literature major, so I guess I kind of have to work it in. And Down a Dark River had a bunch of references, actually. One of them was at the very end. One of the characters talks to Michael Corvin about Dover Beach.
Right. Yeah.
And how, love, let us be true to one another, because, the world may be full of pain, but we can still love in it. And it's something that brings him a certain amount of peace at the end of the book.
It was really beautiful. Anyway, I'm going to invite Julie back now, so we can, Karen can take, take questions from the audience, and I'm sure they're dying to ask her lots of stuff.
There are some questions for sure, and such a great conversation. Thank you, Susan. That was really good. It's like, I know. It's sometimes you get so good. It's like, can we just keep talking? Let's just keep talking about this fun book. Okay, so I don't know if it's Jen or Glenn, because it's GLI, which it looks like a kappa, but she's got here. She has a question here. So for Karen, how do you decide how much time and effort to spend on research? Do you have a maximum time you allow for each book, or number of books, articles to review before you are comfortable and start?
This is a great question. And we're going to ask Susan the same question
Yes.
because she does this kind of research just like I do, where, I actually don't. And I don't mean to, to be sort of glib about it. I have a pretty strong foundation for Victorian studies because that's what I did my dissertation on. And I've been teaching it and editing articles about it for years. So there's kind of like this, a serious, what do you call that? A substratum or something like that.
Mhm.
But when I am researching for a new book, it's a very messy process of I research and feel like, wow, I've got my hands around a basic element of the story. For example, the book that I'm just starting now, Corvin #3, has to do with a series of thefts from department stores. And we think of department stores as a very modern thing, but they actually did have department stores beginning kind of in the 1830s, where they would begin like as a draper, and then they would add a milliner, and then they'd buy another building and put the haberdashery in that one and put jewelry and clocks in the next one. And eventually you end up with a Harvey Nichols, which wraps around the whole entire corner in Knightsbridge, kind of thing. And I started doing all the research for that. And it was like, oh, I'm getting the idea for the story. Now I know, and I could write the first couple chapters, but then I jump back out and I'm like, I need a little bit more research. I need to figure out something else. And so it's a very fluid process. But usually when I can tell I've done enough research when I'm beginning to get itchy to get something onto the page, if that feels right. Yeah. So what about you, Susan?
My process is really similar to yours. And I feel like after 10 Maggie Hope books and now Mother, Daughter, Traitor, Spy, I feel like I sort of have that base level of knowledge about World War II. But, then you're researching the very specific things that are going on. And although this book was really fun in that it was my first book where I did so much primary source material, and it was during COVID. So I couldn't go to the library, which was in Southern California. And a librarian who should be sainted basically photocopied a number of boxes of original documents and sent them to me by email. Wow. I know.
She does need to be sainted.
Yeah, seriously. So yeah, that was a new experience for me to like rely so much on primary documents, but it was fun. It was really fun.
You didn't talk about Susan. I know this is your event, Karen, but can we talk about Susan's book just for a second? Can you
Of
tell us?
course. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little, because when did it come out, Susan? It came out recently, right?
It came out September 20th.
Yeah. And
look, I just happen to have a copy right here.
There it is. Give us what it's about.
So I've told someone that the elevator pitch was Black Klansman meets Little Women, which always gets sort of a laugh, but it's true. It's basically these two women based on two real life women, a mother and a daughter, and they went undercover and infiltrated these Nazi groups in Southern California before Pearl Harbor. And they helped gather so much information that, first of all, stopped any number of horrible and dangerous plots, and also brought the people involved, both German Nazis and American Nazis, to a sedition trial.
Wow.
Talk about history repeating itself. Now, I was working on this during the pandemic. So, the timing of a lot of things that are going on, I just had no idea would be happening, but isn't
it weird though, sometimes how the universe works in that way?
Yeah.
It truly is. It's like, and I'm sure even in your research, Karen, it's just like things will happen and then there'll be an article or there'll be, the world will start doing something. It's like, it's kind of crazy, kind of a little bit crazy. What, so Southern, so did you, well, it was pandemic, so you couldn't really come out here. Do we have much information about it out here in Southern California or not really?
Oh, absolutely. There were just like so many boxes, and I went ultimately after the pandemic, I went to USC and I did research there.
So that's where it was. Okay.
I mean, my last Maggie Hope book. So Maggie Hope is a series. You can read them out of order, but the last one is called The Hollywood Spy. And that's where I read this amazing book called Hitler in Los Angeles. And it really digs into all of the fascist movements that were going on in the 30s and then into the 40s in LA. And that's what really inspired the book. It was my research for Maggie Hope, but then I discovered this mother and daughter, and I became obsessed with them, and I wanted to know more. And then their story was just, I mean, it's funny because the documents themselves were so dry, really. They were like meetings of minutes, and like minutes of meetings. But, you know, but what they did, I mean, the risks they took, I mean, people, these undercover spies were dying, literally. They were being murdered in what were called accidents. No one was ever prosecuted for murder, but people died in very mysterious circumstances. So they were literally putting their lives on the line to help for, you know, democracy and anti-Semitism and racism. They are just an incredible pair. And I loved sort of trying to fill in the gaps that the research left me.
Oh, so fascinating.
Yeah.
So Karen, when you were talking about the Thames, did you ever do, when you were there, have you ever done, because there's another book, I think it's Sarah Penner's book on The Lost Apothecary, where she talks about mudlarking.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do it?
I didn't, but I did see them. So if you walk across Blackfriars, there's that you can actually buy a expedition from TripAdvisor,
right?
Where and they give you the boots and the little, you know, diggy claw thing, and I saw a whole bunch of people out there right on the South Shore, right near Blackfriars Bridge.
Yeah, no,
but I haven't done it yet.
When I read her book, and I'm sure, you know, when you mentioned it, it's like, okay, I want to go to London and do that.
Yes. In fact, there's a great book by Laura Milken, I think her name is. It's called Mudlark. Okay. And she, I think she wrote it pretty recently, but she talks about her experiences as a mudlarker in the 1990s. Okay. Where she was in London and she was doing all of this digging and all the kinds of things that they found. And she kind of works in a whole bunch of history of the Thames. You know, how they would have things like, you know, like the little metal pieces of type the typesetters would use. Right. Well, okay. So like, I didn't know that there was literally an uppercase and a lowercase. Like they were wooden boxes. One was higher than the other. And so that's where we get uppercase and lowercase. But the typesetters, like they were like, you know, after they finished typesetting, they're like, I don't want to put all these back. And so they'd stick them in their pockets and they'd throw them into the Thames on their way home at night. So that's why there were all these little pieces of type in the Thames. I know, isn't that funny? Yeah, I love it. See, those are the little nuggets that are just, they're so great. I love the nuggets. Okay, Amanda's asking a question to you, Karen. Okay. Can you talk a bit more about your research on the history of PTSD? Was there anything that especially surprised you? I think what surprised me most was when I started looking into it and into the accounts. For example, I didn't know that Charles Dickens had been in a railway crash in 1865. It was the Staplehurst disaster. And I became such a train nerd. Like I went to a train conference and they gave me socks so that I could participate and be part of the train nerdiness. It was great. But I, you know, one of the things that I read about was this Stickens disaster, and to try to understand why railway disasters were so horrifying, why they occupied such an enormous place in the Victorian imagination. But think about this: like if we're on a train, right, and the train needs to brake, so we have interlocking brakes, which means all the cars brake, right? Back then, the first 4 or 5 cars would brake and everybody else would slam in. So you've got, say, 100 cars. By the end, I mean, they are falling over. And remember that there are lanterns with like flames that are dangling from the middle of these carriages. Wow. And so, of course, you've got things going on fire. And then you've got, I mean, you have things like livestock cars that are locked from the outside and they immediately get hot because all of the metal work. I mean, it was horrifying. And when I started reading accounts in the medical papers, the parliamentary papers, because every railway disaster, and there were lots of them, had a whole parliamentary inquest. Like they did a whole investigation. They had a special team that would go out and investigate these disasters because they were trying to figure out, how do we stop them? Yeah. But every single one seemed to be different. Sometimes it was in a tunnel, sometimes it was over water, sometimes it was because all the cars, you know, because the riverbank gave way and the cars fell in. And so, but between the medical and legal papers and the parliamentary papers, and then you had novels and newspapers. And I think one of the things that surprised me was how much the language of all of these different things picked up on each other. So the novels, like you'd read an account of a railway disaster and they would have certain tropes. For example, like it was so horrifying as to be indescribable. And you'd see that in the newspaper and in a novel and in a medical journal. And then you think about that, and Freud medicalized that gap, that unspeakability, as part of hysteria. And we still think of gaps in memory or speech as part of PTSD.
Right.
So you can kind of trace this line all the way back. And the reason that I say that the discourse kind of began with the railway disasters was starting in 1850s. It was the first time when medical and legal men, and I use the term advisedly, there were no women, medical and legal men were coming together to try and talk about injury. And they did it in the law courts, and it had financial repercussions because people were suing the joint stock companies that were the railways.
Right.
So, and if you're in England, your first tort cases are always railway cases that you study. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So-
So that was the stuff that surprised me, was I think that intertextuality and all that, how tight it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Do you ever think about writing any nonfiction? Because some of your readers, like, you never thought about an essay or something because it's fascinating.
I think Susan does this too. Like sometimes we'll write blog posts because we have all of this really cool information,
Right.
but you can't jam it into a book because
Right.
then it turns into a treatise. So
Yes.
you take it and you make it like a little bit of a funny little blog post with a story and a picture of Charles Dickens crawling out of the railway carriage with his mistress, because of course
Great.
he was with his mistress, not his
Yeah.
wife. She was at home with
Yeah.
the kids.
Yeah.
And you can
There is that.
yeah, there is that. But you can make an interesting little blog post, a little tidbit about it.
That's a great idea.
So-
That's a great idea. Because I was
Yeah.
because you find out all these things, and it's like it's almost like it would get lost again if
Mhm,
it's not like put somewhere. And
Right.
so having it as a companion on your way. So which leads me to, we're kind of out of time at this point, which leads me to, so do you have a website that you want to direct people to, Karen, that has that blog post? And
Yes. Yeah, actually I do. It's
Okay.
just www.karenodden.com.
okay.
And I do have a blog. And if you scroll back, you'll see all kinds of I call it Vic trivia, funny little things about, anecdotes about Victorian England and Scotland Yard and the Thames and all that.
And people
kind of
can
stuff.
find your social media handles there too, I'm assuming.
Yep,
Perfect.
they're all there. And I also have a newsletter. It only comes out every 6 weeks, so it does not clog your inbox. Besides that, I don't think I'd have the energy to do it.
I was
more
just
often
going to
than
say,
that.
to write one more than
It's a
that,
lot of work. But each time I feature another woman writer and a giveaway of her book.
Oh, nice.
So in fact, next month is my friend Mariah Fredericks, who has a new book out called The Lindbergh Nanny, which is spectacular. It's very, very good. But she's going to be doing a guest feature and a giveaway of a signed copy,
Nice.
first edition copy. So if you sign up for my newsletter, then you can learn all about those.
Fantastic. Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about this writing community. And what I've loved about doing the Zoom events, because obviously we do a lot of in-person events, but I've been the uplifting of everybody uplifting each other in this, it's just been so good. It's so wonderful. I love it.
It is one of the unexpected golden pieces out of being a writer, is the community and the people.
The community. And actually out of the pandemic too, I think a little bit because of all of the Zoom, people are just connecting in a different way and able to connect with more people, I think.
Yes.
It's amazing. So Susan, for you have a website that you want to direct some people to?
I do. It's my full name. So www.susaneliamacneal.com.
Yep.
And again, the new book is Mother, Daughter, Traitor, Spy. The Black Klansman meets Little Women with real life Nazi spies. So
love that. And all your social media is on there too for people that want to follow you on socials. What do you guys have Susan, do you have a particular one you like to do more than other on social?
I like Instagram because basically it's pretty.
Exactly.
Like a lot of pretty pictures, like a little less political and just pretty.
There you go. How about you, Susan? Karen, sorry.
I do both Facebook and Instagram. I do Twitter occasionally, but honestly, Twitter scares me a little. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a little unwieldy.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, as I think a lot of writers that I know and I talk to kind of wrestle with how much time do you spend doing the sort of social media end of things as opposed to your actual reading and researching and writing.
I know.
And that balance can be a little tricky.
It's a really tricky balance, but it seems like, and I've been doing events for authors for, you know, over 10 years, and trust, you know, social media has gotten to be a much more prominent just in our daily lives, but for authors, it's really become almost a part of the job now. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
a good half of the job. It seems like they're expecting social media stuff from you guys. So sorry about that. Anyways, Trisha's saying a great conversation. It truly was. Thank you both for joining us here tonight, and best of luck on the continuation with the release of the book, Karen. And
Thank you.
Susan, the same with yours. And so
you.
we'll see you all later. Thank you all for being here. Bye.
Bye-bye.